Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. And now, here's John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
All right, welcome to the show. This week, you're going to have to deal with just Brandon and I. It's no guests, and I feel like we should always announce that, and people are like, "Oh boy, here we go."
I think though, here's the problem with that. I think if you don't let them figure it out on their own, they're already leaving.
It's better. We at least get 5 minutes into the show and they're like, wait,
that's right. They're like, hey man, they're not introducing.
I didn't hear them talk about somebody.
Hell? That's right.
I didn't hear them mention anybody else. I hope it's not just these two.
I didn't tune in for you two knuckleheads. Shouldn't you be telling us about somebody and where they could be found and how great they are and
how excited you are to have them on?
That's right. We should have pen and paper and
Exactly. Yeah. So, so you are going to be dealing with just Brandon and I tonight. Hopefully that's not too much of a torture. We had Barry Davis last week and got a lot of good feedback on that. And we're going to, as we mentioned on the show, have him back on to talk about some cultural things. And it was one of the things, Brandon, we talked about towards the end of that show last week was, so much of this show is about how to do it right, how to, work on those systems and strategies to get people to become, whether it's better versions of themselves, whether it's to create a better environment and culture within their own team, whether that be a work team, an athletic team, whatever the case may be. But, it's interesting. One of the things that we started to discuss a little bit towards the end of that was when it's not necessarily when it's not going right, but it's just being careful and mindful of those players, those employees that can affect your culture in a negative way. It's like, sometimes you can have a great plan on how to create good culture and a good environment in your work or athletic situation, but you have those guys that are just, whether they're energy robbers, whether they are negative personalities, whatever the case would be, and you have to be mindful of it.
You do, and you hear about it a lot. You don't hear about it obviously in the corporate world as much as you do kind of in the sports world. But I mean, you look at how many institutions and teams are paying coaches to not coach, or gosh, the NFL trade deadline is approaching, right? And you're starting to see really what teams think of certain individuals and players, and not as a player, right? Because it's important, I think, for people to understand that just because you don't fit in that culture doesn't make you a bad player or a bad person or whatever. It just means you don't fit in that culture. Now, you and I have played with people that are energy vampires that absolutely suck the life out of a team, and it's because they just create drama and they create this, that, and the other, and it's just there's a lot to that. But I think when it comes to culture, it's such an important thing. For team success. It's the most important thing for a team's success, because I think, most of our listeners could probably look back and go, wow, how did that team do it? Or look at the Braves, right? 2 nights ago, they clinched the World Series. And for a team that wasn't hardly over 500 going into the All-Star break, and quite honestly looked like they were on a downward progression because they were losing Ronald Acuna, and they there were a lot of issues that team had to overcome. And ultimately, though, that culture that Snitker and the front office were able to create allowed them to overcome a lot. If you watch the series, any of the series that they were in, the losses never seemed to bother them, ever. I mean, they seemed to bounce back the next night and play extremely well. And I think, that's kind of a topical illustration of just how important culture is, because it's not always about the payroll and it's not always about the talent. Culture just plays such a huge role in it. And all the coaches that we've had on have emphasized that for sure.
Yeah. And you think about it in teams that we've coached and been around as players or coaches, where it's a palpable feeling when you have everybody is on the same page and you get that united goal and you can tell that everyone's working to the same thing. And when we talk about that, culture is that, what leads when nobody's watching, it's what that is meant by that saying is the fact that becomes that standard that when everybody buys into it. I remember back in, I guess it would have been 2013 when I was still helping coach in a high school baseball team. And we ended up winning the state championship. And it was because at some point during that season, all of the things that we had been preaching as it relates to, this pitch mentality and always staying in the moment and really not getting too caught up in how many outs there are left in the game and how many, it's funny because when you watch these World Series games and you hear the announcers start to say 6 outs away and 5 outs away or whatever, and you're hoping like heck that your team, if you're a Braves fan, for example, isn't having that mentality, because that can be very dangerous. But I can remember in 2013, we had really emphasized all year long with the team about really playing pitch to pitch, really not getting too caught up in what's about to happen or what has already happened. And I remember we were getting ready to take the field for the 6th inning. And I was walking back from the coaching first base, and the team was huddled up ready to run out onto the field. And one of the players said 6 outs away, because we had the lead in the state championship game. And one of the players said next pitch. And I just thought, man, that's so awesome that not only is that the mentality, but it's also the fact that you have leaders, players that unexpectedly, because this wasn't one of the more vocal leaders, but it's somebody in the right moment said the right thing that got everybody calibrated to, hey, that's right, it is next pitch. Let's just go one pitch at a time until it's over.
For sure. And it is, I mean, we've said it, probably a dozen times over the course of the shows that, the best teams are coach guided and player led, right?
Yeah.
As a coach, you emphasize that culture, you start kind of laying the foundation for it. But at the end of the day, you really have to have the players take ownership and drive for the ultimate success of the team, for sure.
Yeah. And, it's funny. I think this kind of presents itself at different levels differently. So in the pro level, you see it more, you're going to have organizational culture from a standpoint of, the 49ers for a long time had that culture of winning. You see, of course, the Patriots most recently have that culture of winning. And people always talk about when the expectation becomes a high level, then that makes a big difference in the way that they do everything within that organization. And sure. I think about high school sports, how often you can find schools that when they are really good in sports, whether it's multiple, different sports and championships and stuff like that, they're also really good at academics, right? They also are some of the best in their, respective state as it relates to academics, because it just takes over everything. Everybody starts to believe in themselves a little bit differently. So, that's a really cool thing. And that's something we'll definitely bring, Barry Davis back on to unpack that a little bit more. And it's something we've talked about a lot with a lot of the different coaches and thought leaders we've had on the show. But culture, man, oh man, it's one of those things as business leaders, we can really appreciate that as well as how, you got to have everybody aligned, but you also have to have people so aligned that when you have that one person who can break out of the pack and start to infiltrate and start to make it a negative culture, that everybody just takes over and kind of brings them back into the fold.
Yeah, just kind of nip that in the bud. Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is not necessarily on the topic of culture, but I want to get your opinion on something that's in the news right now. Is so of course you all have heard me talk about my son who played football at JMU in Virginia, James Madison University up in Virginia. And Brandon, I don't know if you saw this, but they are getting ready to jump into another conference. It looks like they're going to be joining the Sun Belt. And there was a interesting news tidbit, I guess it came out in the news yesterday, that the conference has said, hey, that's fine. You all go, but just understand you're not going to be playing for any conference championships in this conference this year. And it was like, okay, this is different.
Yeah, for sure. I did see that. I think it's interesting. So, applying that to kind of what we talk about on the podcast, I have thought about that a little bit, and it goes back to control the controllable, right?
Yeah.
As a player, you don't have any control over that. I think the sad thing as a player is James Madison is not in a Power Five. They're what is the
FCS?
FCS, right? So
yeah, in football,
so they have a true playoff system, and so a lot of those guys that play at that level they're going to play out their eligibility, right? If they can, right?
Sure.
I mean, no one's leaving early for the NFL, so typically. So I think the disappointing thing for me as an outsider looking in is that, once again, the administration of whether it's the conference or the other schools within the conference, they're just hurting the athletes that are playing. These are young men and women that have given a lot of themselves. The school has done such a tremendous job at the level that they're at. They're trying to raise, you get to the top of the mountain and it's really just the bottom of another one, right?
Right, exactly.
You have to keep climbing. And I think that James Madison's doing what they feel is right for their student athletes. And it's a shame that the conference is saying, the Colonials saying, yeah, that's great. You go do that. But you can't, it feels punitive to me.
Absolutely.
And I try to put myself in the shoes of both sides. And yes, I understand the Colonial, they'd love to have a champion that's coming back. And there's some things that I certainly understand from that perspective, but I don't think any of it outweighs the sacrifices that student athletes give. And so for them to be penalized for a decision that they really don't have any control over, I think is a little unjust. But again, if they can use it as a tool to learn and grow from, and understand that, hey, you can't control that, it's out of your scope. You kind of figure out how to move on and perform the best that you can while you're there.
No, I think it's one of those things where, what makes you sad, I guess, or feel for, like you said, as the student athletes, because I was thinking about this today, is you have a group of individuals in a lot of cases. I mean, whether it was baseball or volleyball or even football to some degree, that went through COVID last year. So they already had that,
Sure.
Kind of like how to deal with adversity, how to handle things that are, like, to your point, or out of their control when they go through that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you think, okay, I got this, it's worth me coming back, maybe taking some extra classes outside of my degree so that I can remain eligible and still be able to come back for that senior year. And I think you bring up a really good point is, this isn't, necessarily where these players are automatically going to go on and play at the next level. Some of these guys, this is it for them. And so having that opportunity to have that championship, but it does, to your point about bringing it back to what we talk about on this show, it is just another example of how in life, just because you've gone through some adversity one year and had to, readjust your focus and look at it as an opportunity. And if they want to reframe it last year, and we talked about this last year, as far as a lot of those athletes going through a COVID year, is you can look at it as, hey, I'm being robbed of a year, or you can look at it as, hey, I have another year to practice and get better and hone my craft a little bit more and come back even better the next year. And then for those that came back for their senior year and they're into it now, and they're dealing with this again, once again, faced with, having championships robbed from them, having the opportunity to play for titles robbed from them. It is another example of just life's not fair.
Man,
I mean, that's
hard.
Really,
life
it is hard. And I always say, and I don't mean to be flippant about this in any regard, but I always tell people when they're talking about, and you go back to Nina Sossaman Pogue and the whole, some thises are bigger than other thises, right? This would be, for a lot of these athletes, considered a pretty big this. But the reality of it is, it will pass, and you are going to go on with the rest of your life. And as I always tell clients and athletes and people in my own world is, if that's the biggest this you have in your life, then you're going to be pretty daggone happy with your life, right?
Sure.
I mean, it's tough in the moment, but you're going to learn some things from it, hopefully. And you're going to learn, hopefully, the biggest lesson of all, and you might as well learn it now at the age of 19, 20, 21, is life is not fair, and you're going to have to deal with a lot of different things like this. And it's how you respond, how you come back from it is going to be the biggest key in the whole thing.
For sure. It is the response of the team and the coaches and everybody, just, trying to frame it up and keep it in perspective. But to your point, if you told me that at the end of my life that I'm looking back and one of the things that I can look back on and be like, this was really tough, was the year that the Colonial decided I couldn't play for the playoffs. Yeah. I'm gonna be okay with that. I'll take it. I'll take it. So yeah, I am very, very sympathetic and empathetic to the athletes because I know it's important to them. I know it is a big this for them right now. But as life kind of, hopefully continues on for all of them, they'll realize that, hey, there's a little more perspective that'll come from it. And it'll be, hopefully it'll be just a small little blip for them. So, yeah.
And that goes to another point that Nina had brought up was, I thought about her a lot over the last couple of days with this being maybe not the biggest this you'll have in your life, but also that where you can kind of compartmentalize your life into percentages and that, for somebody who's 20 years old, right, this is, those 4 years, that's a pretty significant amount of your life. But now when they're 40, it's a little bit smaller percentage of time. And then when they're 60 and so on and so forth. So I do think it's good, but it is a good reminder for the listeners that you have examples all the time of where stuff just happens to those, that you can see, and you can learn from how people respond to it. And I think that you're going to start seeing a lot of I always like to see how, and the coaches we've had on this show have talked about modeling it, right? And like, sure, this is a great opportunity for those coaches at that school to reframe everything about this, to make this a positive thing, as positive as it can be. Because to your point, it sucks. It is something that's going to be very difficult, but they have an opportunity to model for those. And if they come in and are like, oh, the sky is falling, this is the worst thing that ever happened, then they're, I think, missing an opportunity as leaders within the athletic department, but also within their own teams there, as far as being the head coaches.
I agree, and it also, though, is a good reminder too for the athlete that you are more than just an athlete, right?
Yeah.
There's more to you. You're more complex. You've got support systems, and you've got all kinds of stuff in place that you can kind of take advantage of. I've said it before, I know, to my kids and my family, and I think a lot of people have probably heard me say, if you don't have a crisis, you never really learn kind of how to lean into those things that are there to support you, right? And whether that's faith or family or a number of avenues that you can pursue, those are important. And I think it's important, like you said just a few minutes ago, to be able to learn those lessons at a young age, because you want to know, like as a parent, I want to know my kids can handle adversity, right? I know that I'm probably not the easiest dad, and if you interviewed my kids, they'd probably agree, right? And part of it is probably just me and my personality, but part of it is certainly intentional, in that like a coach, you if you can craft in a safe environment that allows you as a parent to maybe put a little pressure on them just to see how they deal with adversity, to see how resilient they are, and to give you, again, as a parent, the opportunity for you to learn from how they address and handle that stuff, so that you can start to model, to your point, and start to instill some of the stuff that they are going to need in their 20s and 30s and so on and so forth. So I think I always like to look at these as opportunities, and I'm with you. I hope the coaches and the administration there at JMU, leverage it for the benefit of the student athlete, and I would imagine that they will.
No question. And for you parents, we always like to make sure we're including you in these discussions. And, this is a great opportunity to meet your child where they are, that student athlete where they are. Let them embrace that. Like it's going to suck, and let them deal with that. But don't for Pete's sakes tell them, oh, it's okay, it's all right, because it's not all right. In that moment, it's not all right to them or whatever. You can work with them on how to kind of push through that and learn from it and all that. But I think too often we try to refocus them too quickly, and you do want them to allow it to kind of sit there for a minute, because that's how they're going to learn. Yeah.
It needs to hurt a little bit, right? I mean, you if someone were to burn their hand or whatever, I mean, it's like your body with inflammation, right? You hurt yourself. What does your body react? How does it react? It gets inflamed, it swells, it does all this stuff. And it's part of it is to make you aware that, hey, this thing right here, like if it's an ankle, it hurts. I'm hurt. You can't go out and do what you normally want to do. I'm hurt. So to that point, yeah, let them hurt a little bit, let them feel it, and comfort them. But don't mask the pain for them. Let them embrace it a little bit. I think it's
absolutely
important.
Well, speaking of learning things and lessons, you had a great opportunity today to teach some young high school basketball players about meditation and kind of getting present there. What was that experience like?
It was great. I was fortunate enough to be invited back to the high school where my oldest daughter attended and played basketball. She's young enough that a lot of the girls on the team that were like freshmen and sophomores as she was kind of coming through are still on the team. So I knew a good bit of them, but there were a lot of new faces that were, I think everybody was surprised when I kind of walked in the gym. I think they were more surprised when we started talking about how to be present in the moment, because for sure they knew me as the guy that would yell up at up in the corner of the gym,
announcing your presence,
just being supportive, I guess. So it was for sure an interesting opportunity for me. I really enjoyed it. I can't thank Alan Jaeger enough for being on the podcast and kind of introducing me to it, because it's something that ever since that podcast I have practiced and I'm using every day. You never know how high school kids how they're gonna be receptive towards it, and the girls were great. When I told them to kind of, hey, listen, we kind of walked them through it, and I said, here's what we're going to do, and here's what I would like for you to do, and it's vulnerable, right? I mean,
right.
You're asking them to lay down on a gym floor, to close their eyes. And that's a place for most of them of intensity, and that's not a relaxing environment. And we walked through some stuff, and I had taken a ton of notes from Alan and even Sheets. They had this thing about a month ago, and gosh, I think it ended up lasting like 4 or 5 hours.
Right.
And I had to tap out at like hour 3 because it was like midnight. But anyway, I kind of went through and walked them through it. And it's the stuff that I use and on a daily basis. And I had a couple of girls that I think had basically fallen asleep. And we were only there for about 5 minutes. When we finally got into the meditation piece. And it's something, like I told them, that if they'll just practice it, I think it'll help them in the upcoming season. Coach Cudless, Brad Cudless, is the head coach there, and he's committed to doing it. He basically said, listen, we're going to do this before every practice and kind of get used to it. And I think it'll be interesting too. We talk about being kind of player led as a team, but this is also an exercise that any one of those girls could probably walk the team through and benefit from it. So I'm anxious to hear how practice ended up for them. I told them, I said, it's either going to be very good or they're going to all be half asleep. Going
so relaxed.
Yeah. So we'll see.
No, there's so many lessons to be learned from that too. And I think it was wise for you to kind of set the expectation for them ahead of time to say, this is what we're going to do. Because, I see a lot of people who first start to try to introduce some of that imagery and meditation into their practices. And the first thing is they're just like, okay, team, lay down, find a comfortable spot or whatever. And if you're just like jumping right into that, that's going to miss more times than not, because they have to almost understand the why, right? Is why are we doing this? What do we hope to get out of this? Flipping the switch from a mental aspect of getting from all the craziness. And we've talked about this plenty of times, where your typical teenager nowadays, I don't even know how they do it with all of the different influences and stigma that's going on as far as, in as far as their daily lives, just, the social media stuff, the day-to-day school stuff, the pressure of scholastics in general. I mean, I think academics as a whole has gotten a lot more high pressure. And then you throw in the athletic part of it or whatever. So I could easily see where some of the girls would have been like, hey, you know what? This is the first 5 minutes I've been able to sit still today. I might take a nap. I might get so relaxed.
It's funny. So one of the questions that I asked him, so we go through it, and I today it really is just about focusing on the breath, right? And
yep.
You may have thoughts that come in, and that's okay. Let them come in and let them leave, right? I mean, that's
yep.
part of being present and being now is, and Alan kind of has talked about it before, is that's fine, but that's not our focus right now. Just focus on the breath. And so we got done, and I was thanking them for their time, and I said, hey, I do have a question though, right before I leave. I said, how many of y'all, by a show of hands, within the last year or just any time, when was the last time your parent or anyone just said, hey, I want you to just relax for 5 minutes? Like, no chores, no phone, no nothing, just 5 minutes for you to focus on you. And it was really interesting because I think they were expecting hands to go up, and because they all started kind of looking around the circle, and there's probably 30 girls, and nobody's hand went up. Nobody. And so I said, okay, let me rephrase this, because, sometimes in that environment, people are hesitant. They don't want to be the one that puts their hand up whenever. And one of them said, Mr. Brandon, I don't even remember the last time that I had 5 minutes to myself, kind of thing, which is crazy. But
it's insane. Because it's one of those things that I think I'm amazed. We both have teenagers now, and some that are beyond teen years. My son's 24, and I think about how often when it comes to studying, like reading, they have to have music or something going as well, right? There's to that point, like there's no such thing of like just taking
there's always white noise
time to just let everything, take a break. Like when we were kids, I remember, when you were in kindergarten or whatever the case would be, and it was like, hey, we're going to take 15 minutes to lay on little carpet swabs or whatever the case would be. That stuff is not even at that young age now. No. Is it around?
No, it's not. And it's interesting because it probably is to the detriment of the kids. Certainly I think if you were to ask teachers, they would love to have a 10 to 15 minute break in the middle of the day, whether it's after lunch or after, hell, they don't even have recess anymore. You know what I mean? So like how the kids burn off that energy and kind of relax and all that. So it was a really interesting exercise. I'm super appreciative that I was given the opportunity to do it. And, I told them that I would make myself available anytime that they wanted me to do it. So.
No, that's great. And I think they'll be better off for it. And you're doing a great job there, because that's one of those things. It's the gift that keeps on giving as long as they practice it. And that was one of the things that Alan talked about, of course, was, this can't be a one-time thing. It's got to be, you can't expect that it's just going to happen overnight. You got to really, like anything else, like your jump shot, you have to practice, you got to get those reps in or whatever. So I think the fact that coach is going to be making this a part of their everyday routine is going to go a long way.
It will. And it's interesting because if you would have ever asked me if I would have gotten better at meditating, I would have, 6 months ago, I'd have been like, well, better at meditating? Like,
Right.
am I going to get how am I going to get better at meditating? But for sure, to Alan's point, it is a practice. It is something that that you can improve on. But it's such a improvement is probably the wrong way to describe it, right? It's not improving, it's becoming more present, and allowing, and that's the biggest thing. And that was one of my biggest challenges for sure, was me allowing myself to be present and not be distracted by everything else that goes on in a very busy life, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I've tried myself, and I need to get better at it. I need to practice it myself, because I feel like I'm that person who, I think you can sort of make excuses for yourself,
For sure.
where you're trying to do it. You're like, oh, I'm just somebody who's always going to have all these other thoughts going through my mind. And as Alan has pointed out, and others have pointed out that we've talked to, is it's okay to acknowledge those thoughts, let them come in, and just let them pass as you're an observer on the street corner, so to speak. And eventually you will run out of thoughts, right? I mean, hopefully, anyhow. I mean, I would imagine you found that in your practice, that in the beginning it was very hard to get kind of into that, whatever that core moment is, where you're truly in the present.
For sure.
And now it probably happens a lot sooner during that.
It can, but then you're going to have days where you're going to still have a lot of thoughts, because you just have a lot going on. And I think those are the days, just like kind of working out, the days that you don't really feel it and you still find a way to do it, are the days that you probably get the most out of it, right? And so for sure, there's days that, I mean, I can kind of get into it and almost have just, and you can start the jokes now, but literally have nothing in my head. And then there are other days where it just, you use the analogy of kind of just watching it, but from the street side, but you feel like you're in the middle of, you are the traffic cop, and every light is green, and you're trying to, and you just have to kind of be present and push that stuff out to the side and know that all those thoughts are there later. But right now, and being present right now, this is what I'm focused on. So
awesome. No, that's really cool. Well, before we wrap things up, I want to kind of talk about one more mental performance type of thought. And I just want to unpack this a little bit for the listeners. And then I have some exciting news that for the listeners and for you, because you don't even know about this yet. I just found out about this a little bit before we came on the show. But first, I'll leave that as a little teaser for you. But first,
are you and Tracy
I was reading.
Have a kid?
Yeah. No. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that would definitely be breaking news. But no, I was reading through some notes that I had. I'm always like everybody, especially if you're doing this for any type of period of time, you find yourself not only reading a lot of things, but you also are just always writing thoughts down. And I don't remember where I saw this, if it was on a tweet, in a Daily Stoic, whatever the case may be. But it's this thought, and I want to make sure that we talk about this a little bit for the listeners. But it's this thought about never letting circumstance dictate behavior. Mm-hmm. And using this as a point for us to make tonight, so that we're leaving the listeners with one thought that they can go and work on in their daily lives, is, so often we have a tendency, whether it's how much energy I want to bring to work today, whether it's how much, I want to have the right attitude or whatever, is we let everything that's out externally, environmentally kind of dictate, our circumstance dictates that behavior or that mindset that we're going to have. And I really want people to think about, when you are truly in what we would refer to as a mental tough state or mentally, strengthened state, is when you are going to be able to be consistent in those behaviors, regardless of whatever the circumstance is. So if I think about as an athlete, and we'll talk to some of the business people out there as well, because we've talked about the fact that, our audience just isn't athletes and coaches, right, but it's also business leaders and people who, work in the corporate world, whatever the case may be. But there's a lot of things that happen in our daily activities. And you made me think about this when you started talking about because when I think of meditation, I think of discipline. And I think of having that discipline to be able to, this is something I've set out to do on a daily basis. I'm going to stay consistent with it on a daily basis, practice it, whatever the case may be. But how easy it is to allow that, I didn't sleep well last night, so it's going to be very easy for me to skip the meditation part of my day. Maybe that's part of my morning routine and get right into my work. Or I didn't sleep well last night, and now it's going to be easy for me to skip that workout that I had committed myself to do. But, and how often we allow all of these things to work against what we have planned for ourselves. But when you really kind of have arrived, so to speak, from a mental performance standpoint, or mentally tough, strong standpoint, I should say, you're going to find a way that even when you don't feel like it, to still show up and do it.
And that's called discipline.
That's it.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's at the end of the day. And I love the way that you frame that up about not allowing a circumstance to dictate to you, to where you're greater than the circumstance, and your response to the circumstance or the event or whatever is going to give you your outcome. And again, this is from Nina's show in her book. Those thises are could be big, it could be small, but for sure they're disruptive. Like, that's the thing, is it's never, if it ever registers on the scale, then it's disruptive. And whether it's a bad night of sleep, whether it's a bad decision of what you did the night before that limited your sleep, whatever it is, sleep seems to be the common theme that we keep going to. So maybe you and I need to take a nap, but whatever it looks like, right? I didn't eat well. I can't go running because Taco Bell may start coming up. Just whatever. It's having that discipline to overcome the circumstance, and that your reaction to the circumstance is consistent and constant.
Yeah. And not, I think it plays nicely the way we were talking about the JMU situation earlier, because it kind of wraps this whole thing up and puts a nice bow on it. Is there are athletes at that school. This is still early in the year. I mean, we're not even in the second semester yet. So we're just now finishing football and volleyball and some of those fall sports. There is a choice, and we talk about choices all the time, but there's a choice that has to be made now as a student athlete at that school, that my behaviors that I have set out for my behavior recipe, those things that I said I would be committed to for the rest of this year, for the rest of this season, it will be very easy to allow that circumstance to change the behavior. So what I mean by that is, if I'm an athlete on the volleyball team, just because I know I'm not eligible to play in the conference tournament or whatever the case would be, it would be very easy for me not to have some of the same discipline as it relates to going all out in practice or going, to allow those thoughts to creep into like, why does it matter? What's it matter? We're not even going to be playing for a conference championship. We're not even going to be playing for those types of things.
For sure. And I mean, to your point, it's early in the season. So it's not the football team or the volleyball team that's in season right now. So all the work that they did for this season, they did it already. It's the basketball team that's kicking off right now. It's the baseball and softball teams. It's all of those other sports that are still in the process of getting ready for their season. With the example that you're given, you're absolutely right. But it goes back to what you said at the beginning of the podcast is, what are you going to do when people aren't watching? Right. As a team, are you going to accept that, or are you not going to accept that? And if that's not what you're going to allow in on the team and out of your teammates, you're going to be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And do it because you committed yourself to do it. And that's what I really want people to take away from this. And we're using that example of JMU and the tough decision that was made by the Colonial Athletic Association. But also it could apply to the, anything. It could, I remember when, early in my career, working for a company that had a contract, we were contracted out by another company as a sales force. And when you find out that contract is going to end in December and it's September right now, you have a decision. You either coast until the end of December because the contract's not going to be renewed anyhow, or you say, you know what, I committed to a full year of this contract and giving it my all every single day and showing up and bringing energy and enthusiasm and all that stuff. That's mental discipline. That's what we are trying to get across to the listeners, is that do it because you owe it to yourself. You've made the commitment to yourself, and don't do it because of some external factor or external influence. But when you are committed to things internally, you're going to be a lot better off in the long run, because that's what's going to keep you showing up. So good stuff there. Hopefully some people are taking notes on that. So I guess they needed their pen and paper anyhow, even though it wasn't from a guest. Speaking of guests, our big announcement is one of our favorite, we have lots of favorites, but one of our favorite sports psychologists, clinical and sports psychologist, Dr. Brett McCabe, will be joining us again on the show to talk about his new book, Break Free from Suckville. We were talking to his people today, and they have said that he is thrilled to be able to come back on the show and talk about that new book. I mean, everybody has heard me talk about his old books, but Break Free from Suckville is a really good book that I think he was talking about. He was that project when he was on here the last time. So it's nice that is out. I think you can go to Amazon to find that book. I'm sure if you just search for it, you can find it. But I would highly encourage listeners to get that one. And he is going to join us. I want to say it's going to be sometime in December, where he'll be back on the show and talk about that. So we're really excited to have him back on.
We are really excited, especially since you broke that news to me right now. I'm really excited about it. That's fantastic.
Yeah. It was one of those things. It was a last minute thing right before we came on. And I was like, well, I'll just go ahead and save this bombshell for the show. So
that's awesome.
The journalism major in me comes out for those teasers. But anyhow, well, good stuff. I think it's really great that you were able to work with that team today. And I know they're going to get a lot out of that and hopefully continue to practice that discipline. And I think that was kind of what the theme for the show was today, was just really practice and discipline. And it's probably the secret to life in general, is if you live life with a little bit more discipline in your life, not even a little bit more, if you just are consistent.
That's it. Be committed.
Be committed.
Be consistent and committed to yourself, right? And the rest of it will take care of itself.
Awesome. Great last word. We'll talk to you all soon.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.